going to rotate this over, we can see. But the isthmus here is where it attaches to the body of the uterus. But all of this is fallopian tube. And while I have this out, you can see the ovarian ligament right here as well. Ovarian ligament attached to the ovary and the perimetrium of the uterus. The fallopian tube, which captures the oocyte and brings it into the body of the uterus. Let's just put this back together for a second and point out the uterosacral ligament. So this ridge here, there's a little ridge here which is a ligament, and one's going to come all the way around this way and attach to the posterior wall there, and the other one is going to come around and attach to the posterior wall here. On the anterior side, you can see in here, this is the round ligament, and it's attaching to the anterior wall, and there would be another one coming off here and attaching to that anterior wall. So it's going to hold the uterus in place. And all of this here represents the broad ligament here. Now, I'm going to take this apart and look at the outer layer of the uterus called the perimetrium, the thick part of the uterus called the myometrium, and this red border here in light pink indicates the endometrium, which is going to change vascularly under the influence of progesterone. This is the uterus, this is the cervical neck, and the opening to the cervix right here is called the external os. It leads to this canal called the cervical canal, and then opens by way of the internal os into the uterine canal. Here you have the vagina. This is the urogenital diaphragm. This is the bladder, urogenital diaphragm. This is the vestibule, labia minor, labia major. And now we have the reproductive cycle. Obviously all of these are the same. They're just different phases of the 28-day cycle and the endometrial changes. But just looking at this one, all the structures are the same. Starting from the uterus, the outer layer is called the perimetrium, the muscular part is called the myometrium, the inside layer is called the endometrium. This is the vagina, which opens up into the cervix at the cervical os here, external os into the cervical canal, into the uterine canal. Now, as far as identifying the internal and external os, this model is much, much better. You can see these ridges in here indicating the cervical canal, internal os, external os. With this one over here, you can really only see the external os, cervical canal, and an undifferentiated internal os to the uterine cavity. Here we have the ovary. Obviously, there's one on either side. You have the broad ligament, number 12. You have the mesovarium, number 11. And you have the ovarian ligament right here. Can't read that number. And you have the suspensory ligament out here. Now, there would be one over here as well, but it's not shown. So you have the ovarian vein, artery, ligament. Again, broad ligament, mesovarium, ovarian ligament, suspensory ligament. Then we have the ovary. The outer layer of the ovary is called the germinal epithelium. Just to the inside of the germinal epithelium is the tunica albuginea. That's between the red and white border. And then everything inside, other than the follicles, is stroma. So you have cortex, cortical stroma, medulla, medullary stroma. Now the developing follicles. You have an egg nest here, which is full of primordial follicles. Under the influence of FSH, this is the early start of the cycle. It stimulates the follicular development, and this is the primary follicle. You can see a layer of thecal cells surrounding it. They produce estrogen. It advances to become the secondary oocyte. You can see a cavity called the antrum in it developing, and then a very, very large antrum in the mature Graafian follicle or the tertiary follicle. Day 14, this ruptures. This is showing you it rupturing. This is the same thing, the ruptured follicle. So there's the oocyte. It'll be drawn into the fembrae, which is part of the fallopian tube. So ovulation, it enters into the fembrae, the infundibulum. It's now in the fallopian tube. It passes through the fallopian tube, through the isthmus, which connects to the body of the uterus. Now, while that's happening, this now becomes a gland producing progesterone. That's going to stimulate vascular development inside the endometrium, here and over here. But notice that the corpus luteum becomes the corpus albicans, no longer producing progesterone. So as the level of progesterone drops, the lining of the endometrium begins to slough off, marking the beginning of the menstrual cycle, 28-day reproductive cycle. The beginning of it's called the menstrual cycle here, and then the cycle just continues over and over.